Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Castrum Marinum. This is the newest trial made available by patch 5.4 in Final Fantasy XIV, Futures Rewritten. My name is Magitek and I'll be your trial guide. Emerald Shot will target the primary target with a moderate tank buster, cooldown and heal as necessary. Emerald Beam is a rotating double cone attack from the front and back of the boss that will turn in the direction of the arrow indicators. Players will need to continuously turn with the boss to avoid the back and front attacks. While they do this, the boss is also throwing out ring attacks that must be dodged as you rotate with the beam attacks. There is a ton of movement required here to keep up, so watch your feet. Magitek Magnetism will spawn a number of Magitek mines that will soon explode in wide AoE circles. Two of the mines will be tethered together with similar magnets, and they will be pushed apart before they explode. Players will need to identify where the mines will end up after the magnetism effect and stand in appropriate safe zones. Optimized Ultima will deal high raid-wide damage. Be sure to shield and heal, and take extra care of any players with high vulnerability stacks. When the boss splits, his lower half will disappear. Side Scathe will target the entirety of one side of the platform from the boss. Players will need to move away from the glowing side to avoid excess damage. Eventually, a blue AoE circle will appear somewhere on the platform. The lower half of the weapon will return in this area, knocking back all players from the spot. Use knockback immunities or position yourself so as to not get knocked off. At this point, the lower half will rejoin the top half and the mechanics will begin to repeat. The Emerald Beam here will cause the outer edge of the platform to be destroyed, leaving players with a much smaller area to work with. When you see a number of hands pop out of the weapon, the boss will cast a donut attack and all players will need to move into his hitbox to avoid getting hit. Divide at Impera will target the primary target with a heavy hitting tank buster, cooldown and heal. Pulse Laser will target random players with these line attacks. Move away as necessary. During the next split, a number of hands will appear on one side of the platform that will eventually spawn orbs that will slowly move through the platform to the other side. Players will be required to dodge these orbs while also dodging the boss's regular attacks. Eventually, the familiar blue knockback circle will again appear somewhere on the platform and players will need to take care not to get knocked off. The two halves will join up again and the encounter will resume. All of these mechanics will repeat until the boss reaches 1% and transitions into the next part of the encounter. If you wipe from this point on, you'll restart at the beginning of this new phase. In this phase, Divide at Impera will target the main tank with the hard-hitting tank buster, while also targeting the rest of the group with conal attacks. Pop those tank cooldowns while the rest of the raid dodges the cone attacks. Next up, Primus Terminus will mark up 3 players with these fancy new blue telegraphs, and 3 AoE circles will form on one side of the platform. The players marked with blue arrows and anyone in their lane will eventually be knocked in the direction indicated by those arrows. These knockbacks are quite long, and affected players should move to the wall opposite the direction of their arrow will knock them in to avoid getting pushed into the wall. They'll also want to aim away from where the circle AoEs are forming to avoid getting hit by those. All other players should ensure that they're not in the same lane as these players, or they too will be knocked around and potentially murdered. Secundus Terminus Est will mark up some players with an X and some players with a plus sign. These players will eventually drop down swords underneath them that will attack in the direction of the original plus or X symbol. Since these line attacks are massive and can overlap, an easy way to handle this is to have all the markers get dropped against one edge of the arena, allowing for bigger safe zones to form. If your group tends to be a little bit more chaotic, just be ready to find the safe zones and quickly move into them. Tertius Terminus Est will cause 3 rounds of swords to drop down in a sequence. Players can move closer to the last round of swords to drop, wait for the first set to explode, and move into the formed safe zones. This can be quite confusing at first since each sword explodes in an X pattern, so do your best to avoid as much damage as possible until you get the hang of it. Legio Phantasmasis will spawn the Black Wolf's image that should be picked up by the tanks immediately. Soon after, a number of soldiers will appear on 3 edges of the arena in a specific pattern. Each platoon will then line up on the north edge of the platform and attempt to shoot across the platform in order of their appearance. Each line of soldiers will have 1 missing soldier forming a specific safe lane each round. Players will need to identify where the safe spot is for each line of soldiers, move into it to avoid getting hit. Once all the 3 lines fire off, they'll disappear. The damage that you deal to the Black Wolf's image here will also transfer to the Emerald weapon once it returns, so make sure you bring that big Dipus. At this point, these phase mechanics will repeat until the boss is destroyed. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Up next, we'll look at the extreme version of this trial and see if we can't get you some weapons. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.